Welcome to the Best Books Podcast, a new podcast from Orchard Hill Church. The reason behind this podcast is we want to help people choose their next book. When I first got into ministry, and even in my Christian life, I just felt like there were so many books being thrown at me between going to seminary and just going to church. People have their Christian book that they think is the life-changing one. And so we want to do this podcast to sort of cut through the fat and help you determine whether or not a book would be for you. We're going to make these 30-minute episodes, and the goal will be to sort of whet your appetite to help you understand the topic that the book discusses. My guest today is a Young Life alumni, a former Ohio resident, and basketball enthusiast. Please welcome to the show for episode 1, our premiere episode, Russ, don't call me Russell Brasher. Russ, how's it going?
Good, man. I'm excited to be here. I'm actually super honored to be your first guest.
You're my boss, so.
That's true. I didn't want people to know that, but, it's helpful that, Well, I am excited to be here, and it was an honor that you asked me first.
Yeah, thanks. Have you ever gone by Russell at any point in your life, or have you always been Russ?
My great-grandpa was Russell, and I didn't really know him, and then anytime I was ever called Russell, it was usually I'm in trouble by my mom, and so it's just childhood, damage and trauma. Yeah.
For sure. Cool. Well, Russ, why don't you start us by telling us a little bit about yourself, your family, and what you do here at Orchard Hill?
Yeah, so I'm married to my wife, Lindsay, who is also on staff here at Orchard Hill at our Wexford campus in the Kidsburg area. We've got 4 kids, 12, 10, 8, and 5. We just refer to them as numbers because we know our ages or names or anything.
That's great.
But no, we've got 4 kids. We've been married for almost 14 years now, and moved to Pittsburgh in 2015 to do student ministry here, and in 2021 transitioned into adult ministry, which is what I do here now at the Wexford campus. Is I oversee all of adult ministry, which includes this guy and technically this podcast. So I'm just kidding, but
yeah, right.
Very excited to be here, and I love Orchard Hill and have genuinely enjoyed getting a chance to work with you. So glad you're here.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you being the first guest. Since today's topic is all about finding the right hills to die on, that's the book we're doing. I was wondering, what are some strange hills that you're willing to die on? Since I've gotten to know you, you're not a mild-tempered person. I feel like you make your opinions known. You have these opinions. So I feel like I think it was my first day you said that salads were rabbit food. You're just one of those kind of people. You're going to tell people what you think. So.
Why would you eat something you could just walk outside and collect in a bowl and pay for it?
Debatable.
But some of my hills, and I've said this a lot anytime I'm teaching or just in public, and it gets me in trouble at least a little bit, or we might lose half our viewers after I say this.
Great, wonderful. 6 down to 3.
Yeah, no, that's being generous because right now it's just us. No, but I don't believe that cats are a household pet, nor should they ever be in a house. I believe they are the spawn of Satan.
Okay.
But that people hate on Taco Bell, but I genuinely believe it's a legit restaurant and is considered real Mexican food.
Not just for the price, but
price has gone up, and I still believe in Taco Bell. $10 doesn't get you what it used to.
Sure.
And then I believe wholeheartedly that Pittsburgh is actually a basketball town. Not a football, hockey, or baseball, and I would trade any 2 of our franchises for an NBA franchise.
Okay.
So I'm ready to die on those hills.
Are you saying? I just want to pick up on this. You're saying that
we probably lost all our viewers.
The Pirates don't exist. You said 2 franchises.
I would give up 2 franchises.
Oh, okay.
I would trade them away.
I thought you said I would give up all 2 of our franchises. I thought you were just taking a shot at the.
That would be a shot at hockey, if anything.
So.
But that's not a hill I want to die on.
Yeah. Kind of related to that, what are some things that might seem small and negotiable to other people, but to you they're a big deal?
I knew this question was coming, and so for me, one of them is rain and snow. Like for some people, rain and snow is not a big deal. For me, it throws me off of my element. Like today, it's raining out, and I just don't feel like myself. I'm constantly on edge whenever it's rain or snowing.
I noticed that about you. The first time it rained when I worked here, you looked like a...
I drink more coffee on those days. I need more of the Holy Spirit on those days. Okay. Comparing people to MJ, that's a big bugaboo of mine that for some people seems like a fun conversation. For me, it's a serious one.
It's a sin.
I won't say that.
No, it's not a sin.
But MJ is the greatest. And then I truly believe that you can go to the movies alone. And a lot of people, that's like, how could you ever?
See, I agree with that. I think going to the movies alone is actually a better experience. It's especially because nowadays no one goes to the movies. But today we're going to be talking about the importance of theological triage.
Hold on, wait. I know what I heard your prepared answer. I need the people to hear this because
okay.
We're going to go down and view like
controversy.
Episode 1 and done.
So my hot take is that I actually like it when the weather starts to change and it gets darker earlier. Is that that's when we gain an hour? Is that the start of daylight savings or the end of it? I can never remember.
I don't know, and I've heard rumors it's going away, but I want people to know that this is a thing about you.
Yeah, I've never found anyone that has ever agreed with me on this, so I'm fully convinced that it's a hot take. Yeah, including you. So, but I love it. I think it's nice to get darker earlier. My wife makes fun of me because I'm always closing blinds, like the sun. I just have this like thing with the sun where
Are you a vampire?
Yeah. I guess most people find it like the sun is like, oh, I love the warmth, but to me it's like a trade-off. It's like, yeah, but it's in my eyes, So, all right, with your permission, I'd like to transition to.
I just wanted the people to hear that because it needed to be publicly outed.
Sounds good. Yeah, I hope I get people coming up to me at church now saying.
Well, they're not going to watch this podcast, so they better. How are they going to know?
Okay, well, anyway, today we're going to be talking about the importance of theological triage, and that's a fancy term. I wouldn't have even known what that meant before reading this book. So, Russ, why don't you take us through what is triage? What does that word mean? I think some people may have heard it from the medical world, but hearing it with theology might seem kind of weird. So, what is triage, and then what is theological triage?
Yeah, one, I'm excited for this book because you're actually the very first person that I know has also read this book and having a conversation about it. But so how triage is defined and how Ortlund is going to use it is the same thing. It's a system in place for how you prioritize things. A system of prioritization. That's a lot of syllables word there. And then how he attaches it to theology is when you're talking about things as they relate to God and studying God and His Word, there should be a way in which you're systematizing and prioritizing the different things that come up in doctrine. You've given a good definition of it when we kind of reviewed this book.
Yeah, I think it sort of implies that doctrine is not all created equally, and I think that there's a certain temperament where that rubs you the wrong way because truth is truth, right? But I think Ortlund comes along and helpfully says, well, yeah, all truth is truth, but at the same time, there's some hills that just simply aren't worth dying on. There are some things in the Christian life that are primary. Just an example comes to mind is the Trinity, the gospel, everything that relates. The more it relates to the essential gospel truth, the more primary it's going to be. Whereas second-rank things we can sort of disagree on when it comes to baptism. I've plenty of friends who have a different view of baptism than I do, and we stay in a strong brotherhood. And Ortlund's trying to push back on this idea that we need to divide on every little. I don't want to say silly, but every minor doctrinal difference.
Yeah, and I think Gavin does a great job in the beginning of the book, kind of setting that up, because we might not all be able to relate to theological arguments or conversations, but we all can understand the medical hospital side of it, where doctors really have to have some type of system in place where they prioritize as things come in. Do you address the guy who's got a broken arm when a guy over here is in desperate need of surgery because he's bleeding out? And if you choose to go after the broken arm, the minor secondary issue before treating the primary. So I think he sets that up really well, then kind of lays the foundation to start going after some of these, more in our approach than necessarily bringing, the ultimate answer to these, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive in, just really quickly, I'd love to know maybe sort of your background with this topic. Have you ever run into maybe a person in your life where they have sort of this hobby horse thing that they're elevating, or maybe you in your ministry, maybe you've run into people who are like, nothing's important. Truth is relative. Maybe just speak to that. What's been your experience with this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely come across folks that, they are very, very hard on this, and they don't even want to hear another opinion and refuse to acknowledge that there could be an alternative. I've, like you've probably ran into people where they don't even understand why we should have these conversations because does it really matter? But, even like just for me, I think through this book in front of me, I know that's a question that's coming from you, was this idea of like my background. I don't have a church background. I didn't grow up in a church home, and so I didn't, even coming on staff and then going through seminary at the time and just realizing how much different there is in the denominations and how some of that's good and some of that's caused just a lot of issues and concern. And then really, I read this book when COVID really hit back in 2020, and I just saw not only just the nation getting divided and fighting and splitting, but I saw this creeping into churches and seeing real people get, really worked up about things, and then trying to figure out how to keep the church united. So kind of that combination of that is what really kind of put this book in front of me, and I walked away, and it's probably, I would recommend this book top 5 for people to consider reading, but
not MJ level. You're not going to compare it to.
It's
not the Michael Jordan of Christian
It's not the
books.
Michael Jordan of Christian books. Okay. Those are Tim Keller, C.S. Lewis, but we don't talk about those books in this podcast because we're assuming everyone's already read everything they've ever written.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I find that incredibly fascinating. What you said about sort of not having a church background. I'm just curious. Coming to faith and learning about all these differences, secondary, tertiary sort of things. When you came to faith, did you kind of think this is a little silly? Because I'm sure to you knew about the gospel and that was really important. But was there a sense where you were like, why do we need denominations? Did you ever kind of wrestle with that?
Oh yeah, I mean sometimes I still wrestle with it, but I think like one of the things that was, at least again, I'm only speaking from me personally, but. I would be very much in the camp of, or at least I used to be in this camp before reading this book and wrestling with it, is like, hey, if it's not a gospel salvation issue, I'm not even voicing my strong opinion into it because I didn't care as much. But what was really helpful, again, this is just for me, is this book, Ortlund, takes a lot of time to say like, hey, even if something is secondary, or in this book, he actually has a 1 to 4 ranking system where I think he has first ranking essential, second ranking urgent, third is important, and fourth is unimportant. And then he also, there's camps where they break it down into simple primary versus secondary. I would have been more in the primary versus secondary, but even still, what he helps you understand and start to see is if you, everything is essential, but you just have to ask the question, what is it essential for? And even when you look at and have these arguments, or I say arguments, but conversations or differences, you need to be able to come and see how is this thing actually helping you uphold or advance the gospel, even if it is considered secondary or third or fourth rank. So that was probably the biggest thing for me, because I did kind of come in almost bullheaded, where if it's not a salvation, gospel matter, why are we even wasting our breath? But there is a lot of value in talking about these things and having conversation, because it allows us to actually uphold the gospel and salvation even more when we better understand even secondary, or different ranked.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great transition into talking a little bit about the meat of the book. For those that can't see it, our audio listeners, we're reviewing Finding the Right Hills to Die On by Gavin Ortlund. Finding the Right Hills to Die On. If I were to boil it down in just a few sentences, we've already, I think, covered this, but he kind of starts off by talking about doctrinal, let me see if I can get it right, doctrinal sectarianism, which is just
I'm glad you said that word and not me.
Yeah, just a fancy way of saying elevating, elevating small things into bigger things. And then on the other hand, he says there are people who are doctrinal minimalists who downplay everything. And you did a great job just now, just explaining why it's important to avoid both ditches. Because I think if I were to pick one, I think doctrinal minimalism is probably more popular, even among Christians in our day. I think there is this sense that let's just not argue, let's not fight, let's pursue unity. But I think Ortlund talks a lot about that theological unity is only valuable in that we're united in the gospel. There are things that are important and that are worthy to fight over. So the book is really broken down into 2 parts, each comprising 3 chapters. So if you're listening to this and thinking, man, this is this is a really heady theological book. I don't know if I can do this. Just let me encourage you. Russ, can you hold that up?
I thought you were going to say, let me encourage you. Russ read this, so if anybody can. I thought that's what you were going to say. And I would have been that's...
No, I'm not. Episode 1, we're not taking shots like that. But it's a fairly thin book, and I think it's fairly accessible. It's only 6 chapters. I think I remember chapter 3 being like 8 pages or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's a total of like 150 pages too. I mean, it's...
Yeah, so this is an extremely accessible book, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I think that's probably a reason that Ortlund wrote this, because you can find resources on theological triage, but I've never seen the topic embraced in such a concise way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, so like I said, there's 2 parts. In part 1, the author is really just trying to give the reader some foundational things to think about. We already talked about the 2 opposite errors of doctrinal sectarianism versus doctrinal minimalism. And then part 2, Ortlund digs a little deeper into this tier system that you've been talking about, tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so, Russ, which chapters, in your opinion, were the most helpful to you in reading this book?
I mean, definitely if I had to pick, like I said, there's not many. I think there's 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Chapters 1 and 2, and even if I had to pick between both of them, I would say chapter 1. But the combination of those 2 really do, like I said, set the foundation, and then for me, the conclusion, which I guess I'm also creating a secret. What was it called in college and in high school growing up, where if you didn't want to read the book or do the report?
Spark Notes.
Spark Notes. Like, if you really want the Spark Notes, just read chapters 1, 2, and then the conclusion, and you really will get the heart and the hope of Ortlund in this book. But yeah, I would say chapters 1, 2, and conclusion, because that's where you get him tackling both the really strong side and the really weak side of, no, we have to hold these up and fight. And he talks about why that matters and the dangers of it. And then down here, well, we shouldn't hold up anything or fight anything. And then he walks through how we get to that point and the dangers of it. And then the conclusion does wrap up with, ultimately what it comes down to is most of the stuff that we end up fighting about from a doctrinal level really comes down to heart issues that we all individually have. And we're trying to find our identity in these theological views and being right versus wrong. And it's just good.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up, because I think there's a lot of value as far as application in this book. It's not just all information. There's a lot that you can actually do with this book. It'll hit you in a place where sometimes you don't want to be. You don't want to have to come to terms with these things. For me, I think I probably lean more on the doctrinal sectarianism spot. So there were a lot of paragraphs and a lot of parts of that first chapter where it was hitting me, and it was making me really have to think about my own relationship with the Lord and really come to grips of in what ways do I elevate non-issues.
Yeah.
And so no matter where you fall on that spectrum, that's why I like this book so much. It's honestly a great discipleship resource where you can take someone if you're trying to very subtly say, hey, you're elevating these things, you can hand them this book, and I think this book just does a really good job of applying us where we're at. Yeah. I wanted to. We're unfortunately running out of time, but I wanted to just take some time to pull some helpful quotes, just so our listeners can get a flavor of the book, get a sense of what this book is about. So the first quote is from chapter 1, page 42. Ortlund writes, "Much doctrinal separatism, meaning separation over doctrinal issues, stems from finding our identity in our theological distinctives when we should be finding it in the gospel." And Russ, you already touched on this a little bit, finding our identity in theological issues. But maybe go a little deeper into that. What does he mean by finding your identity in doctrinal separatism? And then maybe what's like an example of that?
Yeah, like I said, Ortlund he does it multiple times throughout the book. He brings us back to the reality that most Christians, most churchgoers, end up separating and dividing and breaking off and causing collateral damage over what he would classify as third or mostly fourth rank, or even in he says in page 125, majority of doctrinal fights Christians have today tend to be over third or fourth ranked issues. And some of the most divisive issues among Christians concern not theological matters per se, but cultural, wisdom, or political issues. Mm-hmm. And when we are in some way, whether we are aware of it or not, finding our identity in things outside of Christ, outside of the Gospels, outside of Scripture itself. And we are attaching cultural or personal beliefs or political things. And when those become attached and then we're trying to find our identity, that's where he says, and I would agree, it gets really dangerous, really scary, and a lot of hurt. Because, again, as soon as you separate yourself from finding your identity in the Gospels, which says you can't have pride, you got to have humility. It's not about you, it's about Christ. It's not self-centered, it's self-sacrificial. As soon as you step outside of that, all of those things come with it, and then that's what you bring into any of these doctrinal fights or arguments or conversations. And one of the things that I appreciated about this book too is it does highlight, and I would agree with it, that if you are a Christian, if you are a member of a church, or you identify with a church, no matter how you slice it, there are going to be, in a good way, doctrinal differences. Because the moment you say that you believe in something, what you're also saying is, I don't believe in blank.
Sure.
We have to figure out in a way that glorifies God and creates, unity among the church and its members, and teaching brothers, or not teaching, but treating our brothers and sisters in Christ in a way that when people look at us and go, there's something different about them, I want to know more about what that is, we can say Christ. But when we're not doing those things in a way that is uplifting, a lot of, crap happens. And we can see that throughout history. I mean, in fact, Ortlund talks about, like, hey, you don't even have to be a Christian or a churchgoer to realize or know throughout history, we as Christians have not done a very good job of figuring out ways to disagree. And it's turned out pretty ugly throughout history. So
yeah, and I think it's important to mention too, and he does a good job of touching this in chapter 2. There are certain beliefs that he would call orthodox, and that's a word thrown out a lot. Really, all that means, what orthodoxy means, is this is generally agreed with across church history as an opinion, of view. But there are also some beliefs that are unorthodox, and he kind of says we need to be courageous and bold to say, hey, this is not a belief that is biblical. This is not a belief that is scriptural. One example that I have no qualms with throwing out there right now is universalism. I would say that is a belief that across church history, that if you were to say, hey, there really is, either if you say there's no such thing as hell, nothing really happens to us after we die, all those kinds of things, people throughout church history would say, no, you're wrong. And it's very clear in Scripture, right? And I think it's just important for us to clarify that more what Ortlund's talking about are the things that are more difficult, more hairy. You have to really piece through it. And there is a way to look at the same Scripture and come to different conclusions. Whereas if you look at John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am the only way, I'm the way and the truth and life, I'm the only way to the Father, that's pretty clear cut, right? And so I think it's important to say that. Yeah,
I agree. And like those are the things where Ortlund says, like, hey, at the end of the day, we didn't make this up. Like, this isn't our words or our thoughts. Like, that's Jesus, like Jesus said it. So how, but yet people will come and say, well, no, hold on, wait a minute. But those are the things where if you give ground on that, then it shakes the whole foundation of what the gospel is. So yeah.
I think a good way to wrap up this topic would be sort of a living example. I know in my life I've faced people on both ends of the spectrum. On more of the side of doctrinal sectarianism, sorry, not separatism, pretty much the same thing. I was serving at a church in Dayton area, Ohio, there you go. And I ran across a person in our church who was a deacon, which in that church tradition was basically an elder, someone who was a leader in the church. And before he knew anything about me, he really wanted to know my view about the end times. And I'd kind of push him on that and be like, well, why? Why is this so important to you? And he basically said that everything in the Christian life boils down to the end times. And I understood what he meant by that, but I disagree. I think we can, that is probably a secondary at best issue, probably a tertiary issue, where, Russ, if you came to me and said, well, I'm an amillennialist, you don't need to know what that means, but you have one view and I'm a premillennialist, that's not something that we need to divide over.
Yeah.
But on the other end of that spectrum, I recently, a couple years ago, I went to the Philippines, and I talked to a Filipino pastor, and he asked me what I thought about the end times. And then I told him, and he said, ask me what I think about the end times. And he said, it doesn't matter. We don't really need to know. If God wanted us to know, then he would have told us, you know. And so that's a great example of that other side, doctrinal minimalism, where it's like, it's too hard. There's too much going on here. I don't want to think about it. And I think that's often the heart behind it. It's like, it's people who don't like conflict, that kind of thing. So what we're advocating for, what Ortlund's advocating for, is sort of a middle ground between those two approaches that says these issues are worth fighting for, but we don't necessarily need to divide over them.
100%. And again, I think, you know, Ortlund makes it very clear multiple times. This isn't a book that he's got the answers to fix all of our doctrinal conversation questions, but you know, again, back to your guy he has a different millennial type, you know, pre, post, no matter what camp you would fall in, do you carry yourself in a way with such humility that you have a heart that can hear someone else's out? Like, if you are so strong in pre or post or can you even pick this book up and read an opposing view without losing your mind or wanting to, you know, burn the place down? Like, that's what he's getting at, that deep down, most of our fights and issues really are a personal heart issue because we are refusing to come to the conversation with humility, with gentleness, with kindness, you know, being patient and even just listening and hearing out. But again, and not having to respond so in the moment where we've put time in to say, you know, based on scripture, based on truth, based on, you know, biblical, you know, accuracy and history, these things we don't have to argue about. These things we can. These things we don't even have to see eye to eye on. And why over here are we don't even bring, like, who cares, you know, about what instruments we do or don't play during worship. You know?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I just want to thank you for this whole conversation. Really quickly, I think it'd be helpful for our church members, people who call Orchard Hill their church home, to have some, you know, just some questions a little bit more focused to our church. So within our church, I guess I would ask the golden question, you know, why is it important for church members or people who attend church to understand this topic?
Yeah, I don't just speak for the universal church, but I want to think that I do with this answer, but specifically with Orchard Hill as a church, our mission is to help people find and follow Jesus. And the way that happens is advancing the gospel. And what you see in this book, and it's not just something that Ortlund discovered new under the sun, but when, like, part of the gospel advancing is Christ's design for the church and the church to be united. And if we can't become united on first-rank things, you know, primary things, if we don't figure out how to be able to have differences and still worship together, we are not going to be able to advance the gospel. We're not going to be able to reach people and help them find and follow Jesus, because they're going to turn and look at us and they're going to go, look at how they treat each other, talk to each other, look how they fight and quarrel. Where is this peace that Jesus promises to those that, you know, call him Father? So, like, that would be my biggest thing, is advancing the gospel. And again, if you're coming to a church like Orchard Hill and checking us out, and you're coming with those strong, that this place is going to be a hard place for you to feel like it's a comfortable home, because there's just certain things that we're just not going to throw down and fight over, because they're just not worth hills to die on when we are so focused on reaching people for the gospel. But we do hold truth, but we hold it with gentleness and humility and love.
Right, and I think on the other side of that, I think it's fair to say that helping people find and follow Jesus is the hill that we're going to die on.
Exactly.
Right, and so we're going to all our ministry is going to be performed in that mindset, and that's what it means to have a sort of mission, of a philosophy of ministry. So, Russ, thanks so much. We've been talking to Russ Brasher about Gavin Ortlund's book, Finding the Right Hills to Die On. We really hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to Orchard Hill Plus for more podcasts like this one from Orchard Hill Church. In our next episode, I'm going to be talking to James Isaac, student pastor here at Orchard Hill. We'll be talking about a book simply titled Heaven by Randy Alcorn. My name is John Thiede, and you've been listening to Best Books. Until next time.